there is a lot of angst about in the zeitgeist.
Any pupil which isn't in the independent sector, who goes to the state sector, costs about £5,900 a year.
People look to Britain as being the leader in education. People want their children to be educated in this country.
At the end of the day, this isn't about money. This is an ideological stance.
Teachers could do with being paid more.
Why do you think you were so fortunate to come across so many people who were willing to kind of mould and cultivate your education, even beyond what was required of them?
You can have a teacher or a tutor or a mentor who is very good at what they do, but they can't want it more than you.
And everyone's interesting, but not everyone is interested.
I've always thought that education is what we remember after we've forgotten everything else.
I'm speaking today with Hugh John Pickering-Carter, who is an elite private tutor and education consultant. We're going to be speaking about his trajectory through life, the clients that he works with today, and the changing face of education. Hugh, it's great to have you with me.
Pleasure to be here, David.
Let's take it back to the start.
So the story begins in the mid-1990s. I was born in Essex, and I grew up there. Very loving, supportive family, 2 siblings, and we would do a lot together. And it really was, I think, the best start that one could hope for. We would, I think, particularly a lot of debating, anything and everything that one can imagine, current affairs, politics, philosophy. And a lot of reading, again, encouraged in order to sort of set the foundation. And we would walk. We had pets. It was really, I think a very fortunate start to have in life.
Little holidays you did with your family, were there any that stuck in your mind?
Oh, many. I mean, we were all over, really. America, Europe, the Middle East, and these, I think, very much helped create a sense of there being a world beyond just our immediate surroundings.
I've always thought of those kind of holidays, especially around Europe, as pilgrimages that people take. That's basically what a holiday is. And I don't mean that in an overtly religious way, but in the sense that it's a pilgrimage of beauty. I chose to propose myself, for example, in Florence, because I just had visions of the Accademia Gallery or the Duomo or whatever. And I spend a lot of time in America, and I often chat with people and ask them where they visited in Europe. And it's uncanny that Ireland is so popular. Obviously, because it's kind of the closest frontier to them geographically, and a lot of them have a history there. And I say to them, yes, go visit Ireland by all means, but go and visit Italy.
Yeah.
And go and see Spain, and go and see Germany, and see all the overtly different cultures in such close proximity. Because if you're in, West Virginia, or if you're in Montana or Idaho or Iowa, you can move between these states and sometimes very little changes. But across Europe, that's not the case.
Indeed, and there's a lot to take from those sort of experiences. Firstly, travel adds vigor to the mind. It's something which, when you go away, is not only a good circuit breaker, regardless of your age, but it's a good way of seeing new surroundings. And to go back to my earlier point, it's a good opportunity to change the perspective, and so you can come home with a renewed sense of sort of energy and a different view on anything and everything, and you can I found as a child, then actually apply that to your studies. And it didn't matter if it was, say, something like Berlin or Paris or Venice or America. You can get a much more all-rounded sense of a subject if you've seen it. Yeah, if you've, for example, walked the streets of Venice, or you have gone and visited the battlefields of Europe. You've seen the cemeteries. You've seen the landing beaches. They are your direct connection with what happened, and so it's no longer just about theory in a textbook, but about.
And for learning languages as well, that's an obvious one, right?
And indeed, very, very good for learning languages. Exposure.
I love that concept of the circuit breaker. And that's something that holidays do at all stages of life, right? It allows you to look back on yourself and have a fresh perspective. There's a dialectic at play there in real time. What also always astounds me is traveling full stop. You always take far more than you need.
Indeed, and I think something that's quite nice about travelling, which adds to it being a circuit breaker, is there's an awful lot of things that you're not even aware of the fact you're going to experience. And so it's this idea of the art to which you do not look forward comes as a welcome surprise, and that in itself is a good way of sort of shaking things up a bit, but for the right reasons, and particularly is useful for, I think, pupils to really immerse themselves in the subjects that they're studying, whether it be languages, whether it be history or geography, music, the list goes on. And this is something that certainly was, I think, important for my parents. They have always liked travelling and have, I think, done a very good job of instilling that love of travel and for the world and to learn new things from a very early age.
What was your schooling like yourself growing up?
I went to a very quiet, nice primary school, local primary school, and then moved from there to the local secondary school. It was a big school, over 1,000 pupils, if I recall. And interesting setup at the time because it was split, boys and girls, which even for the time was actually quite unusual. So from years 7 to GCSE, classes were split, male, female, and then the sixth form was mixed. And I had some very, very good teachers there. I had a particularly good German teacher who lived, breathed the subject, which I think for languages in particular is absolutely crucial. And I was very fortunate to have some excellent history teachers all the way through, from beginning to end. Yeah, and history is my main subject, and couldn't have asked in that respect for better or more supportive teachers.
Was there a formative moment or something you covered, something you did that really kind of sparked the interest?
Yes, there was something. I remember doing some work on Italian history and looking at some primary sources, and again, not being aware of the history at that point because it was all very fresh, was looking at some information, and the information seemed contradictory. I was looking at one set of documents from one period and then another set of documents from a few years later, and I thought, well, these don't add up, these are completely contradictory. And I said to my teacher, "Sir, have we got the right documents here? Something seems wrong." And he said, No, nothing's wrong. I said, "Yeah, but the dates, they're so very narrow, and yet things have completely changed." He said, "Yes, that might well be for a reason." And it was a sort of, knowing that one knows something, and having the confidence with which to then be able to run with that thought. There's sort of it's the puzzle. It's the uncovering of the investigation into the shedding new light, and having the confidence in your own research to be able to then present that. That struck me particularly. I think I was about 16.
Those things stick with us.
I've always thought that education is what we remember after we've forgotten everything else from the classroom. So no one is going to expect anybody to remember every single date necessarily, or every single lesson, or every single note from the textbook, but it's the broader lessons that, like this one, for example, that stick with you, that 5, 10, 15, 20 years later one can talk about very clearly. Those are the ones that really can make the difference.
Absolutely. That's something that comes up time and time again in these conversations, is that no one, because we always revisit the past, we revisit people's schooling and formative moments, and no one ever says, oh, it was the moment I learnt this capital, or I learnt that this math.
Yes.
It's never that. It's always, like you said, it's the process, it's a procedural thing that's taken place, or it's an experiential thing. Or it's the guidance, it's the personality of a specific teacher. When you mentioned your history teacher, it made me think of my history teacher, Francis Edwards, a fantastic man. I remember I had to write an essay for some university applications. I left it to the last minute, as one does. And I say last minute, I think this thing was due on Monday morning, and I'd kind of landed this on him on Friday evening, that I kind of wanted to write a historical essay on jazz music and race relations in respect to Benny Goodman and this kind of stuff. And he went down to the library on the weekend and got out these books, delivered them to my home, went back and forwards with me over the weekend, and there was something of reasonable quality I was able to produce because of that on the Monday morning. That sticks in my mind.
Well, yes, and it's a prime example of a teacher that cares, and that's very, very important. It's only as time has gone on, and I think back actually to when I was at school, how important it is as a formative experience to have. You don't even necessarily need that many, but a handful of teachers, maybe just even one, who is invested. Because it can completely alter the direction that one takes, like a fork in the road. And from that, I certainly then started to build the confidence to sort of branch out and then go beyond the syllabus, and so became very interested in particularly the Second World War. And I remember watching a documentary again, because my parents had sort of very much encouraged wider reading, the watching of programs and so forth, and then discussing them. I'd been watching this documentary on the D-Day landings, and particularly Omaha Beach. And from that, I came across a historian who had presented the program, and this is
a famous historian.
So this was a historian from Sandhurst, from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and he was presenting a program on the D-Day landings, and particularly on Omaha Beach. And I remember being so very taken with his knowledge and the energy that was clearly in the subject. So I contacted him via email, and he very kindly invited my parents and I for lunch at Sandhurst. And so we went to Sandhurst, which I was, again, 15, 16, I think at the time, about that. And he hosted us there, and we had a lovely tour of the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and we had lunch, and then he took me to his office, and it was full of books from floor to ceiling on the Normandy landings. And he then gave me some file references for the archives at Kew, and then I went off to Kew some weeks later and then started looking into things like prisoner of war records and photographs and endless number of documents. And it was again going beyond the syllabus. And again, when I think of my childhood, what comes in here are individuals that facilitated and made it happen. My parents, who very kindly took me there and accompanied me around, and were very happy to do so. And the historian, who gave up very kindly his time.
Absolutely, because teaching isn't just the transference of knowledge. It's the framework, isn't it? It's the dramatizing of the framework.
Yeah.
It's the inspiration that emanates from that framework, and that's what comes up time and time again. And so I imagine your day spent at Sandhurst, did that give you any illusions, any ideas of joining the military?
Yes, I mean, I'd always found the military interesting as a concept, and an interest in military history had sort of certainly encouraged that. And so, yes, as I went around the campus, it became apparent, what was on offer, and it was something I was then thinking about, and it could be a potential option as a career in the future. And it was at that time that I then started to come across war studies as a discipline. I'd always been very interested in history, but as I started to do more research, as my GCSE years started to fuse into A-level of where I was going to go to university and what I was going to study, and war studies at King's College London looked very interesting. And so there was this sort of path starting to emerge. I then sat my A-levels. I applied to King's to read war studies. At that point, with no set idea of what I was going to do afterwards, I just, as I wanted to explore King's, what the war studies course had to offer, because it was very broad. It was a combination of history, of philosophy, ethics, strategy, foreign languages, etc. And if the military then turned out to be the potential route, then there was that understanding of how it worked. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of subjects are touted not only for their specific content, but for their transferable skills. So a lot of universities package their history courses, for example, as, yes, we're going to cover this, and this content, but also you're going to learn how to look at primary sources, you're going to learn how to do this, that, and the other. Does that differ much from war studies? Because it seems to me that war studies is situated within history. I mean, is there an argument to be made that some people might be reticent to do that subject because they think it's too specific at an undergraduate level?
It's a very good question, and quite a number of pupils actually have asked me that, pupils who have expressed an interest in studying it. I would actually say it's the other way round. So rather than war studies fitting under the banner of history, it's more history fitting within to war studies, because the nature of the war studies department at King's is multidisciplinary. So the point of it is actually not to be too niche, and rather to actually be much broader, holistic look at war, conflict, and everything associated with it. So when you join, there are a combination of modules, some of which are compulsory, some of which one can choose, as is the case with any degree, and they are as far and wide as covering things like the art of war, so the philosophy of war, and how the mentality of fighting wars has changed over time. So Karl von Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, etc. And then you've got other modules which are, for example, to do with the psychology of war, the experience of war. And so the department would have people come in who were veterans, some of whom were from the Second World War, some had perhaps been in more recent wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as policymakers. And then everything in the middle that one could possibly imagine, strategy, history. It's a very long list of options.
Fantastic. And so that was at King's College London.
Yes.
Whilst you were there, did you immerse yourself in any other activities, any other student groups, societies?
Yes, I mean, I did a lot of running, keen runner, and yes, quite a bit of socialising. So it was all good fun, and really, I think the overarching feeling at that time was that I had put so much effort and work into getting my A-level results that really for the first year or two, I sort of took the foot off the brake.
Academically, at least.
Yes, yeah, a little, and just took every day as it came, and immersed myself in the lectures amongst the other students, some of whom are friends to this day. Really, actually, it was those sort of pub discussions after lectures that really taught me a lot. I mean, I was very fortunate to have an exceptional tutor who's become a friend to this day. And he, again, when I point to my parents and I point to some of my teachers at school and I point to the historian from Sandhurst, my tutor is another person who's invested and was another individual at this particular chapter of my life who showed an interest in all his students' progression. It wasn't just about ticking a box or marking an essay. He would give many hours of his time to many people to discuss anything and everything.
Why do you think you were so fortunate to come across so many people who were willing to kind of mould and cultivate your education, even beyond what was required of them? Could it be because, I mean, everyone's interesting, but not everyone is interested. And it sounds to me that from a young age you were very interested in taking studies further, and maybe that's what caught the imagination of these tutors?
Perhaps, yeah, it might well be. I mean, it's a good question. It's a two-way thing, education. And I've said this to pupils, you can have a teacher or a tutor or a mentor who is very good at what they do, but they can't want it more than you. They can't want the grade for you. There's got to be a two-way dynamic going on. And I think we could call it fate, could call it circumstance, but it's the coming together of minds in any one particular part of life of people on the teaching side who are willing to give everything and to be there, and the pupil or the student being engaged and willing to ask questions and to themselves make the time and go beyond what's expected.
You mentioned that some of these teachers, you said because they care.
Yeah.
And I wondered, obviously this is a generalization, but looking at broader trends, do you think there are more and more teachers who teach because it is a vocation or because it is a job, a relatively secure career path, especially in the state sector? We're always going to need teachers. Do you think this has just changed over time?
Yeah, I can't say what every person's motivation would be, but there are, I think, certainly within the profession, from my experience, those that see it as a vocation, and they are very much wanting to dedicate themselves to the perfection of what they do. And then there are those who perhaps have sort of, through osmosis, found their way going into the field, perhaps because it's a means of earning an income, it's a way of utilising their degree, but they're not necessarily overly connected with the principle of education.
Right, yes.
Quite necessarily where one begins and one ends, and to whom it applies, that it's a broad question. Many people. Teaching, it's a bit like nursing or the police or being a midwife, for example. They're all fundamentally about, in my view, service, and they're about human interaction. So there's got to be that human element there. And so if you are an individual with a character, with a particular subject specialism, then there's everything to play for. But again, if people have gone into it more with the view of just, say, either ticking a box or earning an income, and they're not too interested in sort of cultivating the idea of the human spirit, then it's always going to be a bit of an uphill battle, I think, in terms of fulfillment.
And then there's the time element as well, isn't there? Because teachers are often under pressure. Every lesson needs to be planned. Every lesson results in a vast, maybe potentially vast amount of marking. And then to be able to go over and above with each individual student, if each individual student is wanting that, I think it's the time element, which many people might have that will. Yes. But actually being able to do it, being able to fulfill that for a large number of students.
Undoubtedly. I've known a lot of teachers. I've taught myself previously, and it's a tough job. It's very emotionally draining. because again, it's fundamentally a human endeavour, and you're having to obviously be able to deliver continuously. It's not a case of, well, I'll wait until next week. No, the syllabus needs to be covered, and pupils have got their exams approaching, and so everything has to be done in a certain fashion and in a certain order. And then when you throw into the mix life, more broadly, family commitments, etc., there's a lot of things for teachers to have to juggle, and so there is a lot of pressure, and therefore, it's quite a tough job, and so they might, perhaps, as you say, start in one place but end up quite quickly sort of finding themselves in another.
Do you think, on the whole, teachers, let's speak for the UK, do you think they're underpaid for the role that they serve?
I mean, from what I know in terms of, obviously you've got the state section, you've got the independent sector, there is a scale, and that will go up depending upon one's experience and perhaps the nature of the subject that also one's teaching, because there are certain subjects that are in demand and others that are not so in demand. So there are, for example, not necessarily perks in terms of pay, but grants available and so forth, whether it comes to study or allowances. So the pay can be made up in other areas. But as a broad point about pay, teachers could do with being paid more, I think, because of the nature of how formative it is for society, and because of the amount of pressure that there is.
In dramatic series, I'm thinking of things such as Waterloo Road, or I think even like Adolescence. At least the imposition of knowledge is not the thing that's often foregrounded. Okay, these are dramas, but you see time and time again the teachers getting sucked into necessarily pastoral issues, and all the rest of it.
That I don't think is necessarily the fault of the system per se. That is downstream from society at large, like so many things. Teachers at one point would have taught. They were not expected to be social workers or to be continuously looking out 24/7 for pastoral matters beyond the school. Due to a combination of reasons, it's not specific to any one time, but a sort of span of time. Society has undergone change, and we are living, I think, in quite uncertain times, and there is a lot of angst about in the zeitgeist, and with that, of course, that is going to filter through to children. It's going to filter through, therefore, to school. On top of the zeitgeist having changed, there's the added dimension of technology, which is what it is. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And so teachers have had to adapt to that as well. And it's a notoriously difficult thing to manage, whether it be inside the school or outside the school. So there are a whole series of things that teachers and schools at large now have to manage that previously they just didn't. And so that's added to the complexity of the profession, I think. And one could argue is another reason why they warrant being paid more.
And university teaching has gone the same way. If we look at the last 100 years, there was more of a kind of what used to be like a moral stewardship role that might have been taken by lecturers, etc. Cultivating the minds of their students in obviously starting with their subjects, but then branching out from that. Whereas now, student well-being is increasingly centre stage. You see universities. That's a very wide remit, of course. So you've got career services, but then you've also got coffee hours, you've got yoga retreats, you've got physiotherapists, you've got all of these random stories which pop up, and wildly interesting. That raises the question of where the parameters of the teacher should end and when pastoral provision should begin. And I don't think anyone can really agree on these.
So this actually goes back to where we started, and it's to do with family, and it's to do with the connection with education. So much of the sort of foundations are built, I believe, by the family and by parenting. And if those areas of a child's life are stable and consistent and positive, then by definition, there are going to be fewer opportunities for things to go wrong by the time they get to school.
By the time they get to the bridge, I mean, sociologist Tolcott Parsons called education that bridge between the family and between, let's say, the career that might be on the other end of that bridge. And of course, we all know what happens when a bridge doesn't have two strong pillars on either side, or at least a strong starting place.
Certainly, yes. And again, this is sort of all happening in real time, but the questions are starting to be raised about where should the emphasis be? Is the process of having the schools manage a lot of these pastoral matters actually the right avenue to pursue? Because one could argue it's almost too late by the time it's got to that stage. So this is where society at large and education being downstream from it sort of merge, and it becomes increasingly complex to be able to draw those parameters of, well, if it's not coming from the household or the home, where exactly should the teachers step in? So family is, to my mind, very important and is inseparable. It's the surroundings, it's the exposure, it's the expectation, it's the rules, it's the discipline, it's the sense of, as we say, foundation. And so it will be interesting to see, as society adapts further, how teaching and the profession at large adapts with it.
So you have a sparkling career as an educator now. When did that coalesce? When did you have a mind to become a teacher? I mean, because we haven't delved into it.
Yes.
Before we started speaking today, you mentioned that there was an accident in your youth at the same time where you were kind of pursuing a few different options.
Yes. So when I was at King's studying my undergraduate degree, as time was developing and I was getting towards the end of the degree, I had to start thinking about, well, what am I going to do next? And so that's when I started to think seriously about joining the army. And in my final year of university, I was hit by a car. And so I ended up with 2 fractured wrists and part of my arms fractured as well. And so it meant a military career was no longer possible because the fractures were such that, if you lie in certain positions or if you're trying to hold up a weapon or so forth, it's going to become very, very vulnerable. And if you're having to carry large amounts of equipment and a rifle and a helmet and so forth, and then you fall.
And you've got a weakness there. You've got a weakness for life.
Yes, and if you're training to be an officer, it's not just about you. It's about the men and women that you're leading. And so that avenue was then shut.
Do you mind going into that day, that accident?
I think it was quite late. It was in October, I'm sure, if I remember. And I was on a bicycle, and it was an accident, very much an accident. It was just a case of the car involved and me on the bicycle. Misjudgment of speed and time and so forth from the driver's perspective, and it just happened, and the rest is history, as they say.
The day could have been better, but it could have been worse.
Yes, yeah. Actually, as it turns out, we knew the driver.
Oh, really?
Yes, and everything was fine. There was no hard feelings at all. But what it meant was that I started to think about what else I could be doing. And the idea of teaching had always appealed to me because, and I wouldn't want to draw too many parallels, but it's about setting an example. It's about service, in my mind. So they're not a million miles apart.
Oh, exactly that. It's about shaping the people around you and the people under you.
Absolutely. So I started doing some private tuition work. to earn some money, but also to start to implement some of the things that I'd learned and to pass on the ideas to others. And then I applied to read a master's degree. So I went back to King's, this time at the Institute of Psychiatry, and I did a War and Psychiatry Masters of Science, an MSc, which was a sort of combination of history and sort of psychology combined, with a sort of psychiatric element mixed in.
So what would the kind of core content for a subject like that look like?
So again, quite broad. There was a historical element, because the interesting thing is the course was run by actually a historian, but who had also since sort of moved sideways into psychology. And so he had brought the course together with the two disciplines. And so the course attracted a very broad array of people. There were people from the military, there were people from academia, there were people from all over the world. There were some doctors on the course, some civil servants, etc. So very broad, and then there was me. Yeah. So it was a fascinating course in terms of exposure to different characters and professional backgrounds, and the actual modules were again, as far and wide as the history of military psychiatry. So how has psychiatry as a discipline changed over time? How do different countries historically view mental health? We looked at Russia versus America versus Britain versus Germany, for example. It moved then into shell shock, post-traumatic stress disorder. It moved into the psychological impacts of biochemical weapons attacks, and then also as broad as hostage negotiation and the psychology involved with the process of facilitating the release of someone if they'd been held hostage or if they had been in a kidnap for ransom situation.
Did you go into the techniques of strength versus passivity and the best approaches to take when negotiating those kind of deals?
Yes. No, I was again very fortunate to be able to interview a number of people who had experiences either themselves having been a hostage or had facilitated the release of hostages or kidnapped for ransom cases. And so it was interesting to see both sides of the equation of what it's like to be held in captivity for prolonged periods of time, particularly if you are not aware of how long you're going to be there. If someone goes to prison, they go to prison and they're there for a set period of time. It might be for a very long time, but psychologically they know in theory when they're going to be released. Yes. But if you're in captivity and you don't know if you're going to be there a week, 2 weeks, or 2 years, or 20 years, there's a whole other psychological phenomenon involved. And then on the other side of the equation, there was the hostage negotiators, the kidnap for ransom consultants, etc. And so that was more to do with how the team there can work together in such a way so as to reassure families of the hostage, and how best to communicate with the hostage takers.
It must have been around that time that you were studying this that there's the case of, is it Yasmin Nagari Ratcliffe? Because she was released, wasn't it? I'm racking my brains here.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back now. I don't know a huge amount about the case.
I think that was Iran.
Yes, if memory serves correctly, yeah. And I didn't cover that as part of my thesis because I had to keep the parameters and the case studies quite specific. And also that one was still very much unfolding.
Yes.
So I'm sort of trying to think of the exact timeline, but I do recall reading about it. Yeah.
Gosh. And so you did the tutoring work. You moved back. You did this marvelous masters with the very long name.
Yes.
Could you just repeat what was it again?
War and Psychiatry.
Okay, and so you did that masters, and then what happened next after that?
So I finished the master's degree, and then I carried on tutoring. Still, that carried on beyond the academic year finishing, and then I thought about going into teaching. So I applied to an independent school not far from where I was living at the time, and I took a position there as an academic fellow. So it was almost like a sort of introductory role to teaching. And I had a combination of things to do, including supporting sixth formers with their university applications, doing some teaching, bit of history, a bit of theology, but under supervision, and having other more experienced teachers take notes, for example. And I also worked in the library, assisted the librarian with her duties, and help run the school's combined cadet force, so the CCF.
Myriad activities.
Yes, sort of many hats. Yeah.
Okay. And you went through you taught at a couple of schools during that period?
Yeah, so I then took a promotion at another independent school in Britain, boarding school this time, and I moved there and I worked for 2 academic years, sort of just under 2 calendar years, I think, sort of losing track of time, where I taught history and politics. And then that was a maternity cover role, so it was for a set period of time. I completed that and then moved to a 3rd independent school in the same capacity.
So you have a pretty good grasp of the area and the schools in that area.
Yes, yeah.
And the challenges that they might currently be facing? Can you speak to that, the changing face of the independent sector?
Well, many of these schools go back a long way. Some of them date back as far as the 16th century, some further back than that. So they have a long history, and they have, again, through necessity, had to adapt to changing circumstances, changing society, because they are ultimately a business. I mean, they're a school first and foremost, but they are a business. They are always having to keep their eyes open and to adapt to changing circumstances. And I think they're doing a pretty good job of that, to ensure that they remain centre and relevant in the 21st century. Part of what enables them, I think, and has enabled them to do this so well, in many cases, is that they have a strong, again, element of service and a strong element of charity. So many of them are actually founded on charitable foundations. And so they are a good way of setting a certain standard of what to expect from education, and also they are, depending on the school, a way of helping those that are very capable, very bright, but have not necessarily had the easiest or simplest of starts in life, who can then be facilitated through the system.
There's a very uncertain fiscal future for a lot of the independent schools in Britain. You write very pithy, very well formulated pieces on all matters pertaining to academia. But one of them in particular, you talk about Labour and their VAT hike, meddling with the independent schools. And I remember in the piece, you raised some very interesting statistics, because this is often couched as well a way to raise a lot of money. And the stats, if I remember correctly, came out of the Adam Smith Institute, which said any pupil which isn't in the independent sector, who goes to the state sector, costs about £5,900 a year. With 10 to 15% of students leaving the public schools, that immediately would cost about £1.5 billion, which is the exact amount that would be raised by this tax hike. But if as many as 20 to 25% of students left the independent schools, which is feasible, it would end up costing £1.5 billion. So there's an argument to be made here, and a lot of commentators make it, that at the end of the day, this isn't about money. This is an ideological stance.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, there are, of course, all number of areas that the government could potentially raise revenue from, and so this has been one of the avenues the current government has decided to pursue. The idea of actually putting VAT on independent schools is nothing new. It's just now that it's happened. So it's not specific as a policy to this particular government. They just happen to be the one who have carried it through. No, I don't think it's about pragmatism or about raising money. I do think it's about ideology, and I find it rather sad on the one hand that a system that does work so very well and is coveted the world over, and I know this because I speak to a lot of people from overseas, from a lot of different countries, and people look to Britain as being the leader in education. People want their children to be educated in this country because it is such a rigorous, well-structured and well-tested system. To be taking from these cultural institutions that have got so much history and have done so well in terms of producing leading minds, to add this VAT and in turn threaten the survival of some of them is deeply worrying and sad. And the irony of the policy, of course, and this is already starting to bear out, we'll see what happens as time goes on, but what is happening is that the larger independent schools are able to survive because they are able to fall back on savings and on investment and
trusts, more
and so forth.
benefactors, deeper roots.
The smaller local schools are the ones that really suffer, the ones that have been set up by perhaps people within the village or the town to educate the pupils locally. They're the ones that really suffer. And also the schools that have a lot of special educational needs as well, they have suffered considerably because they're operating very much sort of on a margin, and having the VAT added tips it over the edge to no longer make it affordable. So I don't think the policy's done any good, and I don't think, and we will have to see what the numbers are in time to come, but will raise any revenue. So it begs the question, well, what is this about?
I mean, it could go deeper as well. I know that a number of people have tried to pay school fees in years up front to beat the hike.
Yes.
But there's also there's the risk that the government could be coming after that money retrospectively, especially because technically, and I'm no economic expert, but VAT usually has to be paid at the moment of the transaction. And so, therefore, I could pay you now for a service that you then promised to fulfill in 5 years, but then technically the VAT should be paid then whenever the service is taken out. So again, this is in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds, which has been put into the private school system by canny parents, but might undo them. I don't know if you're aware of this.
Yes, I'm sort of broadly aware of the fact that it's an avenue that could be pursued. I don't know exactly the nature of how it would work or whether it will be pursued, but time will tell. Yeah, this is very much an evolving, ongoing matter and policy, so that the full effects of it, and in turn how parents and schools choose to adapt, is happening as we speak.
In your writing, you often pick up these not little issues, quite big issues, but you kind of deal with them in very enlightening ways in a matter of paragraphs. And so I encourage anyone who isn't familiar with your writing to check that out. You've also written about Titbit education.
Yes.
Tell us about the Titbits.
This came from a combination of my own experience of having studied various subjects and now having gone through the system, come out the other end, and now I'm in the process of teaching it to others. And what's become apparent from my own experience, and in turn now having taught it to others, is that a lot of the syllabus for various subjects, history I think in particular, I'll talk about history because it's my area, are fragmented. So I found this myself as a pupil, I found it when I was teaching at the schools, and I've found it increasingly now as a private tutor, that, for example, and I say this in the article, in history, a pupil can go from studying the Norman Conquest in year 7 to maybe the Russian Revolution or something associated with it at GCSE, to then studying the Tudors at A-level with all number of other things thrown in along the way. And so there is this sort of fragmented delivery of the information, and so at no point does anyone get a proper sense of chronology. Some schools have done their best, I think, to select modules within GCSE, for example, that span a century, and so they try and get them to overlap.
Right.
And so they're trying to mitigate against that fundamental structural matter and problem. But it's interesting. It's only, say, for example, when I speak to my tutor from university who actually went through the French school system, he interestingly told me about how at the time, I mean, this would have been several decades ago now, but through primary, and then to some extent also into secondary, you are taught a sort of set period each year. And with each year that goes by, you get taught another century or another decade. And so what you get is a sense of chronology. And the jigsaw fits together.
Thematic lineage.
And a thematic lineage. And so then you end up at the end, if you've pursued history through to 18, with a very broad, strong sense of how everything connects together. Whereas, as things stand at the moment in this country, in Britain, with teaching of history, it's, as I say, a bit from here, a bit from there, and it's all sort of sewn together. And this isn't the fault of the schools, and it's not the fault of the teachers.
No.
It's the structural problems of the system that need to be looked at, because they can only teach what's put in front of them.
And you see this at university level as well, where you've got this kind of modular teaching, and obviously there's pros and cons to that. Of course, you can't study everything, but Newman, when he writes about the essence of the university, he talks about having this connected view and grasp of things, and you cannot do that. But no matter how many individual modules you take, it's more like a tapestry, isn't it? It's not like we can just read a book on this, read a book on that, read a book on this. You need to know the rough, you need to know the outline of that jigsaw. Else you'll just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper down particular rabbit holes.
Well, yes, exactly. If you start a jigsaw from the middle, it's going to be far more difficult than if one starts the jigsaw from building the perimeter.
Exactly.
And so you can learn a whole load about the Norman conquest in England, or you can learn an awful lot about, say, the Weimar Republic in Germany and then the rise of Hitler, and then learn about Henry VIII during the Tudor period. But all you end up with are just little vignettes of the story. Yes. And you can't, as a pupil, do anything with that. It's interesting, don't get me wrong, but it's very difficult for one to actually then tangibly use that information, whereas if it's taught thematically and it's taught with a sense of chronology and lineage, sort of linear progression, then one is able to recognize the whole notion of cause and consequence so much more effectively. And so given that we live, and I write this in the article, in an increasingly complex and uncertain world, pupils need to be able to leave school with skills, and history is such a skill of being able to recognize patterns. Cause and consequence.
Yes, pattern recognition across the disciplines. This is something that E.O. Wilson talks about in Consilience, because we're not against, or I'm not against modularity per se, if that can be used to pursue something that's multi or interdisciplinary. However, if those things remain fragmented, that's when you've got the problem. So I think for me, it's in that education process, always foregrounding that this happened, but what does this remind us of?
Yes.
Where are the resonances?
What's the purpose of it? I mean, it's a good question that pupils often ask, both I found in tuition and also when I was teaching. Why are we learning this, sir? Which is a very good question, and I would encourage all pupils to ask their teachers in a polite manner and at the right time. Timing is all. Why are we studying this? It doesn't matter whether it's studying the Second World War in history, or if you're studying algebra in maths, or you're studying river formation in geography. It's so much easier to learn about anything if you know what the utility of it's going to be, especially if it's quite a detached or abstract notion. It needs to be, I've found, pinned down to reality and delivered in such a way so that people can think, yeah, okay, I see how this is going to plug into my life.
I think a drawing upwards as well as a drawing downwards.
Yeah.
So you can ask one approach to say, but why, but why, but why, always looking for that utility, which there's something oikophilic about that, bringing it back to home. You know, how is this going to benefit me and what I think I require? But at the same time, I think plucking upwards and saying sometimes knowledge for knowledge's sake,
Yes.
beauty for beauty's sake,
Yes.
interest for interest's sake, is an end in itself. That can be a harder sell for some students.
Yes, and I've tried to say this to pupils, particularly when they get to the stage of preparing for university. This idea of, you know, don't prepare for university, but prepare for the universe. It's an important concept. It might sound cliched, but if all you do is prepare to pass an exam, or if all you do is prepare to get into a certain university, what does one do once you've got the exam?
Yes.
Or once you've arrived at the university? And particularly when pupils are being prepared for Oxford or Cambridge or one of the London colleges or a leading university, Ivy League in America, they are quite often going to get quite a bit of preparation. Not all, but some are going to get quite a bit of preparation. But they need to be able to survive once they get there. It's like going to the Olympics. It's one thing getting there. It's another thing maintaining your title. And if you, as a character, haven't, whilst you're at school, got your head around the whole notion, as you say, of knowledge for knowledge's sake, you're going to find that a struggle. And also, it's not as enriching.
Of course. There's something very comforting about these structures, always working within the paradigms of exams or university or whatever it is. But eventually, once you've done your 10th master's degree or second PhD, there comes the time where you have to jump out of that overtly educative framework.
Yes.
And it's funny that you bring up the example of Olympic athletes, because, or just high-level sports, athletes of any sport, because a lot of these people spend their lives working within a very fixed paradigm. Imagine you're trying to be a tennis player, and you start at the age of 3, and you have these grand dreams, and you work at that. At some point, probably around mid to late 30s, suddenly that paradigm is not going to exist for you anymore. And so, I mean, this leads to a lot of depression, because the framework of people's lives is suddenly taken. The meaning is taken out of that. And I mean, there are many ways around this, of course. But from what you're saying, it seems.
Well, also it comes down to the idea that, you know, the world is, and this might sound unduly pessimistic, but it's an interesting place, but it can sometimes be a tough place. And it's, you know, when times are good, they're good. They somewhat speak for themselves. When times are bad, people have to be able to fall back on something, and it's a good education that will enable you to get through those bad times. So simply just being taught how to pass an exam is not going to give you the tools to manage those difficult times. And the more you've gone out of your way to, say, collect information, to think about it carefully beyond the syllabus, beyond the exam, the more of it that it's likely to easily support you when the time comes where you need to sit and reflect.
Would you say that a Stoic philosophy underpins your teaching practice?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and I've written a piece on Stoicism recently, actually, to do with how pupils, or how anybody for that matter, but pupils in particular, can take basic Stoic ideas and apply them to their own life to get the most out of their education. A lot of it is very simple, yet often neglected, or just not considered at all.
You broke it down into reason, virtue, and discipline. It's kind of 3 main pillars.
That's right. First, reason is very much to do with the idea of seeing the world as it is rather than perhaps how we might like it to be. I think it's important that people remain optimistic, and they can see obviously a better tomorrow. But at the same time, it's very important to recognize that there are going to be occasions, probably perhaps more than one would like, where things are not as one would like them to be. And so it's important, therefore, that in those times of uncertainty, in those moments where things are not as one would like them to be, one needs to focus on controlling what can be controlled. And one thing that pupils can control is their education. They can control how much effort they put into their studies. They can control how much revision they do for exams. They can control how many books or electronic articles or whatever it happens to be they pick up and decide to read. It's ultimately your education, something that can never be taken away from you. Once you've got it, you have it. And it's then something you continuously build on. It doesn't stop. And that in turn, during times of uncertainty, is a good way of making productive use of the time. So that's reason.
On to virtue.
Yes, I think I say in the article, virtue is something that's often discussed but rarely practiced. And I use the example of whatever one does should be done with a sense of purpose. Life is too short to simply bumble along.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the finitude that gives it meaning, but still, one shouldn't bumble along.
No, indeed, because life is too short, and so from my perspective, it's important that pupils study whatever they study with a sense of direction in mind. Mm-hmm. Firstly, it's a good way of them making whatever they have studied applicable. So it goes back to our point earlier. But at the same time, there is a sense of progression. There is something they're aiming towards. And as I say in the article, it could be really excellent mark in the final exam, or it could be, again, simply just absorbing knowledge for knowledge's sake and exploring the subject completely freely with no parameters for developing cultural understanding or whatever. And you can see this. History, as we said, helps with pattern recognition. The whole notion of understanding the past, to be able to understand your present, to be able to plan better for the future. Foreign languages are very, very good for memory retention. And maths, for example, is also very good for problem solving. Mm-hmm. If you identify these things, you think, what am I getting out of it? Then you can walk away feeling better prepared for whatever comes next.
Let's finish with discipline.
When I trace it back, I think of the disciplined people in my life, my parents, for example, very disciplined people. And I'm so very grateful for that, because I like to think that it is rubbed off to some extent. And so through my tutoring and also through my teaching, I've always pushed the idea of discipline and the importance of it. Mm-hmm.
And how it differs from motivation.
Exactly.
Motivation, as we all know, can come and go, but if you have those kind of disciplined foundations, might be a way through.
Well, yes, I mean, anyone can do anything when they're feeling good, within reason. It's doing the things that one does not want to do, and doing them, when no one is watching, and when the journey is going to be a long one and a difficult one. That's when the discipline is truly measured. Mm-hmm. So it's not measured by the things we want to do, but how well we do the things we don't want to do. And this is important because it's, to my mind, again, a cornerstone of life. And something that I think, from my own experience and also from having seen other pupils go through the process, pays dividends, because ultimately what you put in is what you get out. Mm-hmm. If you have a minimum input, maximum output sort of idea about, for example, revision, it's going to catch up with you. Not necessarily straight away, but eventually. Mm-hmm. There are some things in life one will perhaps try and do a minimum input, maximum output approach. But when it comes to education, I don't think it works. And so the discipline to have structure, the discipline to, say, get up and do what needs to be done, even if one would rather not, is absolutely fundamental. If the whole notion of education and a good education is going to come to fruition. It's got to be there. It's a central pillar.
Hugh, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Pleasure. Thank you.